On Tuesday night, April 14th, a reporter named Brian Manabat sheltered inside his home on Saipan with his wife and 4 children. The winds were already screaming. He recorded voice memos and sent them out by phone. In one of them, he said something that tells you everything you need to know about what it means to live on these islands. His landlord had assured him before the storm that the unit was typhoon-proof and FEMA inspected. He sheltered there, and as the wind tore through the island, he said the unit was holding. It was really typhoon-proof. NPR. By morning, most of his neighbors were not as fortunate. The street outside was unrecognizable. Every tree on Beach Road, the ironwood trees, the flame trees that line the waterfront, had been stripped bare. Coconut palms had fallen onto parked cars. Roads were submerged under 4 feet of water. A woman in Garapan bent down in the wreckage of her property, surrounded by twisted metal, broken wood, and scattered belongings, working quietly to salvage what she could. M. Variety. She is not a statistic. She is the story. There are roughly 45,000 people on Saipan and Tinian. They are American citizens. They hold American passports. Their sons and daughters serve in the United States military at rates that, per capita, exceed almost every state on the mainland. And on the night of April 14th, 2026, they sat inside their homes or fled to school gyms and community centers to wait, while the strongest tropical cyclone on Earth in 2026 parked itself directly above their islands and refused to move. Super Typhoon Sinlaku formed southeast of the Northern Mariana Islands and rapidly grew to a Category 5 system with 185-mile-per-hour winds. Civil beat. By the time it made landfall, it was carrying sustained winds of 150 miles per hour. But the wind speed is not what made this storm different from every other major typhoon that has struck these islands in the past decade. What made it different was the pace at which it traveled. Sinlaku crawled at roughly 3 miles per hour as it passed over Saipan and Tinian, meaning residents endured hours inside the eye wall, the most intense conditions a tropical cyclone can produce. Post-Guam. A normal typhoon hits and moves. Sinlaku hit and stayed. Saipan had typhoon force conditions for over 24 hours and tropical storm force conditions for over 3 days. Post-Guam. The all-clear was not declared until Friday. The storm had arrived Tuesday night. 50 hours of sustained destruction across islands that are, at their widest point, roughly 12 miles across. Wind gusts of 150 miles per hour ripped roofs from homes, tore large trees up by the roots, and blew large power poles to the ground. American Red Cross roads became rivers. Cars were lifted and slammed against concrete walls. The photographs that came out of Garapan in the storm's immediate aftermath showed a landscape that looked less like a tourist island and more like a place that had been systematically dismantled. Here is what that looks like on the ground, in the specific geography of these islands, for the specific people who live there. Saipan is the largest island in the Northern Mariana chain, home to the overwhelming majority of the CNMI's population. Its economy depends almost entirely on 2 things: tourism and the government. The resort hotels along the southern waterfront, the ones that kept the lights on for the entire Commonwealth, reported losing backup generators. The only hospital on Saipan suffered severe flooding. NPR. Think about what that means in practice. An island of 45,000 people has one hospital. That one hospital flooded. The backup power systems at major resorts, the facilities that are supposed to keep running when the grid goes down, failed. In the immediate hours after the storm, the island's medical infrastructure and its economic infrastructure were both simultaneously compromised. Power and water were out across Saipan and Tinian, and many roads were impassable. NPR. The public information officer for the CNMI's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management sent a text message to the Associated Press on Thursday morning, 2 days after the storm made landfall, explaining that a shelter-in-place order was still in effect, and that first responders had not yet been able to do a full damage assessment. 2 days after the storm, the island was still so dangerous, so blocked with debris, so inundated with standing water, that the people whose job it is to understand what happened could not yet reach most of the places where it happened. Tinian, the smaller island 45 miles to the south, fared no better. Residents reported homes damaged or torn apart and extensive tree loss. Recovery there was expected to be complex because infrastructure resilience was already under strain following Typhoon Mawar in 2023. The Watchers, the chief of staff to the Tinian mayor, rode out the storm with municipal officials and came out to find that the scale of destruction was comparable to Super Typhoon U2. He chose his words carefully. Anything that was tinned out here is destroyed. RNZ. Tinned means corrugated tin roofing. It is cheap. It is the material that most families who are not in FEMA-built or reinforced concrete housing have lived under for generations on these islands. In a normal year, it survives a typhoon with some damage. In a sustained 150-mile-per-hour wind event that lasts more than a day, it does not survive. It shreds. It becomes projectile debris. And then the house underneath it, The walls, the furniture, the photographs, the documents, everything a family has built over years, is exposed to the rain and the wind and the flooding that follow. A week after the storm, a man named Rogel Teope was still sheltering at Tinian Elementary School with his family. He had heard Sinlaku was coming and decided to take his family to the shelter to be safe. The decision likely saved their lives. When they came back to their place, their roof was gone. Trees were down. Everything was destroyed. Marianas press. He said those words quietly, without drama. Our roof is gone. Everything. He said they are taking recovery one day at a time. At Tinian Elementary School, the American Red Cross shelter manager counted 105 to 110 people, still housed in classrooms a week after the storm. Marianas press a week after the storm, sleeping on cots in school classrooms because the homes they left when they evacuated no longer have roofs. World Central Kitchen was distributing hundreds of meals daily, including deliveries to vulnerable residents who could not reach distribution points. The organization's community outreach manager said, "A meal is not just nourishing. It provides comfort and dignity." RNZ. That is true. It is also a statement about what the people receiving those meals have been reduced to, through no fault of their own, in the middle of the year on American soil. The Micronesian Legal Services Corporation sent out an advisory to residents, reminding them that under CNMI law, tenants may terminate their lease without penalty if their home was rendered uninhabitable by the typhoon, but must notify their landlord in writing, describe the damage in detail, and document everything with photos. NMI News Service. That legal advisory is a small window into the complexity of what recovery actually looks like for the people at the bottom of the income spectrum on these islands. To terminate a lease properly, you need to write a letter, you need to take photographs, you need to keep copies of communications. You need to do all of that while you are living in a school gym with no power in your home, no running water, and no certainty about when either will return. The journalist Brian Manabat, whose FEMA-inspected unit held through the storm, recorded a final voice memo after the all-clear. He said Saipan is devastated. He said the economy depends on tourism, and because of this devastation, it is so hard to tell when they can recover. And then he said something that is easy to overlook in the scale of the disaster. He said the residents are very resilient and very tough, and they would carry on, regardless of this devastation. NPR. He said that not as comfort. He said it as fact. These are people who have been carrying on through typhoons their entire lives. Through Sudalor in 2015, through U2 in 2018, through Mawar in 2023. Each time the storm passes, the federal declaration arrives, the aid organizations set up distribution points, and the people who live here do what they have always done. They go back to their damaged homes, they clear the debris, they put blue tarps over the roofless walls, they get in line for water, and they carry on. After Super Typhoon U2 8 years ago, thousands of homes were destroyed and children were forced to go to school in tents. Grist. The recovery from U2 was documented in audits and oversight reports that noted the two main drivers of the CNMI economy, tourism and gaming, came to a nearly complete standstill for an extended period. Businesses that were supposed to reopen never did. The full comeback took years longer than any official timeline projected. And when the next storm came, and then the next, and now Sinlaku, the baseline from which the islands had to recover was lower than it had been before U2 because the recovery from U2 was never fully finished. Like the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, Guam and the CNMI are U.S. territories where geography can complicate disaster response and recovery. St. Thomas Source. Every piece of equipment needed to restore the power grid. Every replacement pole, every transformer, every generator, every spool of cable has to be shipped across the Pacific. The nearest major port with those supplies is thousands of miles away. When 604 power poles are down on secondary lines alone on a single island, the logistics of replacing them are not the same as they would be in Texas or Florida, where trucks can drive in from neighboring states within hours. Here, every shipment requires advanced planning, booking of cargo space on limited air and sea routes, and then the physical challenge of moving heavy equipment across islands where the roads are still blocked by debris from the storm that destroyed the infrastructure you are trying to rebuild. FEMA Region 9. Administrator Robert Fenton, on the ground in the CNMI within days of the storm, acknowledged that the sheer size of Sinlaku, 500 miles in diameter, and its slow movement made it especially destructive, with the storm taking 48 to 72 hours to move through. Isla Public, he said, the most urgent need was restoring water. He said the agency knew which generators powered which wells and would prioritize those. That coordination is genuine. The people doing this work are working hard and they know what they're doing. But knowing what you're doing and being able to do it at the speed that 45,000 people without power and water require are two different things. And the gap between those two things is where the real human cost of this disaster lives, not in the press releases, not in the damage assessments. In the school classroom where Rogel Teope is sleeping on a cot 1 week after the storm, because his roof is gone and no one has told him when he can go home. Meanwhile, in the waters north of Saipan, the search for the crew of the cargo vessel Mariana continues. Searchers found the body of one of the 6 missing crew members inside the overturned ship. U.S. Air Force divers used an underwater drone to search inside the hull. Japan's Coast Guard arrived to assist. The 5 remaining crew members have not been found. CP-24 search aircraft are still scanning the ocean for an orange 12-person life raft. The Coast Guard and agencies from Guam, Japan, and New Zealand have covered more than 99,000 square nautical miles. The mathematics of survival in open ocean, after more than a week, do not favor the missing. But the search continues. These are the 2 stories that exist side by side in the aftermath of Sinlaku. The story of a territory rebuilding, generators humming at the hospital, water trucks making their rounds, families on cots in school gyms, weaving palm leaves into flowers to give to the Red Cross volunteers who brought them food. At the Red Cross shelter at the Cagman Community Center, 2 residents named Tasi Cepeda and Ha'ani Shapida spent time weaving palm leaves into flowers, which they shared with other shelter residents and Red Cross workers. American Red Cross. That image, 2 people with no home, no power, no certainty about tomorrow, making flowers out of leaves to give to strangers, is who these people are. It is why the journalist Manabet said what he said. Resilient, tough, they carry on. The question that resilience cannot answer is why they have to. Why islands that have been part of the United States since 1978, whose residents have served in the American military, whose strategic location in the Western Pacific the U.S. Military is now actively exploiting for its own purposes. Why those islands still have a power grid that 604 downed poles can collapse entirely. Why there is 1 hospital on Saipan with no backup beyond a generator. Why the housing stock for working families is still primarily corrugated tin that does not survive a wind speed that these islands experience every few years. Brian Manabat, still clearing debris from his neighborhood days after the storm, said, "It is so hard to tell when they can recover." NPR. He is right. It is hard to tell. It was hard to tell after Sudalor. It was hard to tell after U2. It is hard to tell now. And it will still be hard to tell after the next storm, which will come as it always does, because these are islands in the Typhoon Belt, and the Typhoon Belt does not negotiate. The difference between a catastrophe and a pattern is whether anyone learns from it. The children of the CNMI have now grown up watching their parents clear debris after storms, wait in line for water, sleep in school gyms, rebuild with whatever they could afford, and then do it again. They have watched the declarations be signed and the aid organizations arrive and the cameras leave and the recovery stretch on longer than anyone promised. They know how this works. They have known since they were children. At what point does a government that calls these people its own citizens decide that resilience should not be a survival requirement? That carrying on should not be the only plan? And if the answer to that question has not changed after Sudalor or U2 or Mawar or Sinlaku, what exactly would it take to change it? On Tinian, Rogel Teope is still in the shelter. His roof is gone. He said thank you. He said they really, really need your help. He is still waiting.